Shalom and welcome to our third, maybe even our fourth in our series that we're doing on different types of coverings. 2 videos back, we talked about the Torah commandment that the priests, the Kohanim, in the Holy Temple were required to have their heads covered. In fact, there was a death penalty if their head was uncovered. Now, in our last session, what we dealt with is Paul. Because Paul is generally seen both in Christianity and in Judaism as being someone that did not follow the Halacha. However, we taught from Acts chapter 21, where we see that Paul proves that he is a Torah-observant Jew. Now, with that in mind, in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 2, he makes a statement. He says, keep the paradosis, that's the Greek word, as I delivered it to you. The word paradosis, this Greek word, is the Hebrew equivalent to halakha. Halakha is a word that comes from the word holech, which means to walk. So halakha is how you walk in the commandments. How you walk in the commandments. So we have established that the halakha for the Kohanim, for the priests, was all the temple when they're in services. They have to have their heads covered. But now what we want to cover is the general halakha of the Jewish men. Did they have their heads covered? And the answer is yes. From even the first temple period, all the reliefs that we have in the palaces of the Assyrian kings, the Babylonian kings, from the Egyptians, we see that the men of Judah, the men of Israel, had their heads covered. We have in the Halakha, I want to read to you from Moses Maimonides. Now, this is going to be from the 1100s, but he is actually speaking about what was the ruling from the ancient times. So, in the Mishneh Torah, in what is called Sefer Avodah, the Hilkot Tefillah, and the Birkat Kohanim, that's the name of the book. That's going to be Halakha chapter 5 and Halakha 5. It says proper clothing. What is implied? One should adjust his clothing and make himself neat and presentable before praying, as implied by Psalms chapter 29, verse 2. They bow to God in resplendent holiness. One should not pray wearing only his undershirt, barefooted, or barefoot. Now, we have, and I'm going to give some evidence for this in a moment, we have that the priests were called to have a head covering on anytime they were in service. I want to go back to the book of Shemot, Exodus, chapter 19. Now, this is going to be from a Koran Tanakh, so I'm going to show this to you. This is the Koran Tanakh. Koran is the largest publisher of Judaica, of religious Jewish books such as the Tanakh, the Siddurim, and so forth. And they're headquartered out of Jerusalem. And so from chapter 19 of Exodus, now this is when the people have arrived at Mount Sinai. And so this is going to be chapter 19, verse 5 and 6. We don't have that the priesthood is set up yet, the family of Aaron from the tribe of Levi. So, chapter 19, verse 5 and 6. Now, therefore, if you obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own treasure from among all peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So, we have 12 tribes. The tribe of Levi is going to be set apart for the services, but the family of Aaron out of that tribe are going to be the priests for the temple. Yet all of these tribes are going to be priests to their families. And to this day, when we sit at the table, the mother and the father act as the priests, especially on the Shabbat, the festivals, and so forth. But we do many, many things through the service to be aware of the priesthood to the family. Now, based upon that verse out of Exodus chapter 19, the halakha of the Jewish men was that when they prayed, when they in fact, let me read a quote to you. This is from Isaac Klein, and the title of the book is A Guide to Jewish Religious Practice. And it says, a Jew ought to cover his head when in the synagogue, at prayer, or sacred study, when engaging in a ritual act, and when eating. Now, we've already discussed about the priest had to have their heads covered in the temple. All the people that came to the temple, all of the men that came to the temple had to have their heads covered. Now, we don't know in the ancient times if it was the Halacha for a man to have his head covered at all times. Now, that came to be several reasons. One is for the sanctification of the name of God. Another is that we have a Menachot. I'm going to read from the Talmud Bavli, or the Babylonian Talmud, from Menachot 43b. Menachot's going to deal with the bread offerings and so forth. And this is just a little section of 43b. It says, it was taught, Rabbi Meir used to say, a man is bound to say 100 blessings daily, as it is written. And now, Israel, what doeth the Lord thy God require of thee? Okay, so the teaching was that a man should say a minimum of 100 blessings a day. Now, a blessing is going to be a form of prayer. And so to say a blessing, you would have your head covered. I mean, we just read that. So anytime you say a blessing, anytime you say a prayer, anytime you study the scriptures, anytime that you go through a service, if you go to Israel, you go to the Western Wall, the Kotel, they're going to give you a kippah, a little covering to put on your head because you're going to a holy place. Now, the kippah, whether it was worn or the head covering that was worn all the time at the end of the Second Temple period by the general male population, we can't say for sure. That's controversial. But we do know that they did cover the head for these purposes, for these functions. And based upon that a man should say 100 blessings a day, you would be putting a head covering on all through the day. Now, very interestingly, Paul had an expression that actually comes from the same 100 blessings a day. This is going to be found in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 17. And let me read this to you. It says, pray without ceasing. Pray without ceasing. And so it's the same concept. Now, I want to tell a story. Back several years ago, my wife and I, my daughter, we were invited to go to Saskatchewan, Canada. We go up there frequently and speak. It's a wonderful group up there. And our friends who were staying in their home that had invited us up there took us, after I finished teaching, to look around that part of Saskatchewan. In Regina, the capital of that province, they have an academy for the Royal Canadian Mounted Mounties. And it's kind of like their West Point. And so we went to see this academy, and the cadets all come out and they march in formation. It's very impressive. I mean, it was just fascinating to watch. Well, it turned out that the commanding officer of all of the Mounties walked into the room. In the bleachers were several cadets that were watching. They weren't participating, marching through the drills and so forth, the formations they were going through. One of them didn't have a head covering on. He didn't have his part of his uniform was not on his head. The commanding general comes over and he literally chews this man out and he says, have you no water? Or do you think this is a place that you can just dance into bareheaded? Are you trying to insult us? It's the same idea that we have that's come down through the ages of the Jewish people in Israel or in a Jewish community. You go in and you go into a building, you put a hat on. You sit at a table to eat, you put a hat on. You're going to say a prayer, you put a hat on. Now, in the Christian world, and much of the non-Jewish Torah world, based upon 1 Corinthians 11, which seems to say a man praying with his head covered dishonors his head. But I'm going to submit that that's actually not what's being communicated. In fact, that's not even literally what it says there. In those communities, when a man goes in his house, he takes his head covering off. When he sits down to eat, he removes his hat. When he prays, he bows his head and he removes his hat. So when Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, 2, keep the paradosis, keep the halakha as I delivered it to you, was it a new halakha? Was it a new rendering for these believers in Yeshua? I don't think so. Everything that Paul does, everything that he says is going to be consistent. When we look at it and examine it, it's going to be consistent with Jewish practice of that day and time. So I hope that you'll stay with us, and I hope that you will have some great revelation as we go through, and you will come to see the head coverings for men and for women, at least with a better idea of what 1 Corinthians chapter 11 was saying. Shalom. Shalom. I hope you enjoyed the teaching we just went through. We have more that we have planned, but I'd like to show you my newest book. This is called Measure the Pattern, Volume 1. It deals with the latest research on the Holy Temple. It shows definitively exactly where the temple building was, all the various structures, the courtyards, and more than I can describe here. Go to our website. There's a link below and check the book out.